Welcome to NTD News Today. Here are today's top stories. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell accuses the government of going after the agency over interest rates following Justice Department subpoenas. President Trump says he has no knowledge of the investigation as stock futures fall. President Trump says the Iranian regime is seeking negotiations after he warned of possible military action. What Trump is saying as unrest escalates in the Islamic Republic. Federal agents surge into Minnesota as ICE ramps up operations. DHS Secretary Kristi Noem says hundreds more agents are arriving. Nurses in New York City have begun their largest strike in the city's history. Nearly 16,000 nurses walk off the job as the union says talks have stalled. Meta names a new president and vice chairman. She previously served as a former deputy national security advisor to President Trump.
This is NTD News Today, live from our global headquarters in New York City.
Today's Monday, January 12th. I'm Stephanie Cox. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell says the central bank has been served with grand jury subpoenas by the Department of Justice. Powell confirmed yesterday that officials threatened a criminal indictment over his Senate Banking Committee testimony in June 2025. The testimony concerned in part a multi-year project to renovate historic Federal Reserve office buildings. The central bank chief dismissed the idea that this criminal probe was driven by his testimony or the renovation. Powell called the threat of criminal charges a consequence of the Federal Reserve's handling of interest rates. His remarks came hours after reports surfaced that federal prosecutors opened their inquiry. And President Trump says he had no knowledge of the DOJ's investigation into the Fed chair. Trump criticized Powell in an interview with NBC News yesterday. He accused him of not doing a good job. Trump denied applying pressure through the probe, saying he wouldn't even think of doing that. The president says the real pressure comes from interest rates being far too high. U.S. stock futures slid to start the week with the Dow, the S&P 500, and NASDAQ futures all lower as investors reduced risk. At the same time, gold prices surged to a new all-time high this morning, breaking $4,600 an ounce. That's as traders moved into safe haven assets amid rising uncertainty. National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett this morning commented on the investigation.
I respect the independence of the Justice Department and the Fed. But I've not seen any materials that have been handed to the Fed by the Justice Department. I guess the question is, if you think the building costs $20 billion or $10 billion, do you think at some point that it's appropriate for the federal government to investigate? And seems like the Justice Department has decided that they want to see what's going on over there with this building that's, massively more expensive than any building in the history of Washington. And if I were Fed chair, I would want them to do that. I think that it's really important to understand where the taxpayer money goes and to understand why it goes this way or that.
President Trump continues to assert that the U.S. needs to take control of Greenland. President yesterday repeating what he sees as the risk of Russia and China gaining the upper hand on the island.
If we don't take Greenland, Russia or China will take Greenland, and I am not going to let that happen.
Is there any deal they can offer you?
Yeah, sure. I'd love to make a deal with them. It's easier. But one way or the other, we're going to have Greenland. You know what their defense is? 2 dog sleds. In the meantime, you have Russian destroyers and submarines and China destroyers and submarines all over the place. We're not going to let that happen. And if it affects NATO, then it affects NATO.
Trump said again that he would like to make a deal to acquire Greenland, a semi-autonomous region that's part of NATO ally Denmark. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen has warned that an American takeover of Greenland would mark the end of NATO. Greenland is the largest island in the world, aside from Australia. It has a population of around 57,000 and it doesn't have its own military. NATO Chief Mark Rutte says there's no crisis over President Trump's interest in Greenland. He said that NATO is also interested in protecting the Arctic from common adversaries.
Let me first of all stress that all allies agree on the importance of the Arctic and Arctic security, because we know that with sea lanes opening up, there is a risk that the Russians and the Chinese will be more active. And as you know, no, not at all. And I think we are really working in the right direction here.
Rutte added that he thinks President Trump is taking helpful steps for the alliance. The NATO chief says that without Trump, alliance members wouldn't have agreed to increase their defense spending. Similar to Rutte, Trump also pointed out the threat posed by China and Russia. The president says the best solution would be to strike a deal with Denmark so the U.S. can protect Greenland. And now we'll look at Minnesota and the ICE operations there to apprehend criminal illegal immigrants. DHS Secretary Kristi Noem says hundreds more agents are on the way. NTD's Daniel Monahan has more as tensions have heated up after an ICE officer was involved in a fatal shooting last week.
DHS recently sent 2,000 federal immigration agents to Minneapolis, and hundreds were set to arrive yesterday and today amid widespread fraud allegations. Protests erupted after a January 7th incident in which an ICE officer fatally shot a protester as she hit him with her car in an apparent attempt to flee. Minnesota officials are calling for state authorities to be included in the shooting investigation. President Trump reacted to the incident aboard Air Force One.
These people have been harassed and threatened every day. They had bands out playing so they couldn't sleep at the hotel. I see what they're doing to them. They're threatening them constantly. And all they're doing is doing what I got elected on.
Trump said he believes the woman and her friend behaved like professional agitators.
The woman and her friend were highly disrespectful of law enforcement. You saw that. They were harassing them, were following for days and for hours.
Trump said people have to respect law enforcement.
At a very minimum, that woman was very, very disrespectful to law enforcement. And you heard the same noises. You saw the same crunch that I saw. You can't do that with law enforcement, whether it's police or ICE or Border Patrol or anybody else.
Homeland Security Chief Kristi Noem defended the officer.
Law enforcement officers every day in this country are in difficult situations where they have to make split-second decisions to protect themselves, the public, and their colleagues, and that they have to rely on their training. That's exactly what this officer did.
Noem questioned the fairness of media coverage of the incident.
I haven't heard you say once what a disservice it's done for Mayor Frey to get up and to tell ICE to get the F out of his city, and AOC to stand up before she had any of the facts and call this officer a murderer. For individuals, well, call them out, Jake. Spend as much time calling them out.
Noem says ICE is making the streets safer.
These sanctuary cities, such as Minneapolis, are extremely dangerous for American citizens. And Jake, since we've been there, we've arrested dozens and dozens of murderers and rapists, individuals who have assaulted children and sodomized them.
Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey pushed back, saying there have been 2 shootings so far this year in the city, and one involved ICE.
This is a safe city. ICE and Kristi Noem and everything they're doing is making it far less safe.
Police Department Chief Brian O'Hara says he'll be the first to stand up for cops he supervises if he believes they acted within the law.
We have to use caution, even as Tom Homan has said, and allow a full and impartial investigation to proceed.
Border Czar Tom Homan said he believes the officer thought his life was in danger, speaking on Fox News.
Let's stop the hateful rhetoric. You can't compare this to murder. Murder requires malice, and that is just dangerous to put that type of language out. Let the investigation play out and see where it lies.
Homan says it's important to remember why ICE is in the city to begin with.
Because you're a sanctuary city that purposely releases public safety threats back into the public. I just mentioned about all these cases that child sex trafficking, child sodomy, child rape, that they release back into the community. These are people we have to go look for. And who set the stage for all this? The last 4 years of an open border, millions of people released in this country without vetting, a lot of criminals, a lot of national security threats.
Tens of thousands of people took to the streets of Minneapolis yesterday and Saturday to protest the shooting of Renee Nicole Good. Conflicts between protesters and ICE officers took place outside a federal building that the agency is using as a detention facility.
The clashes also embroiled conservative influencer Nick Sorder, who sped off from the scene with fellow influencer Cam Higbee after conflicts with protesters culminated in his vehicle being surrounded. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
Thanks to Daniel for that report. The woman killed in Minnesota, Renee Good, was reportedly part of an activist group which shared so-called de-arrest instructions with members. It's called Minnesota Ice Watch. The group has chapters across the country, including in New York. According to the National Review, the Minnesota branch shared a post on Instagram that described how to de-arrest a person. One post suggesting pushing or pulling an officer off an arrestee. It appears the post was removed on Friday. The New York Post reports that a friend described Good as an Ice Watch warrior. And the State Department revealed that it revoked more than 100,000 foreign visas last year. That's twice the Biden administration's from the year before. The department says the majority of visas pulled were from business people and tourists who overstayed their time. About 8,000 were from students and about 2,500 were from specialized workers. A department spokesperson explained that these were mostly due to criminal charges and arrests. The Trump administration said it's reviewing all 55 million foreign visas and is enforcing stricter standards to obtain a U.S. visa. And coming up, expert insights on the unrest in Iran as the regime there contends with questions over its survival. Meanwhile, nurses in New York City have begun their largest strike in the city's history. Nearly 16,000 nurses walk off the job as the union says talks have stalled. More on that after this. Welcome back to NTD Today. Anti-government protests are escalating in Iran and have now entered their third week. President Trump is again warning the U.S. could take military action in response to the regime's treatment of protesters. Here's that story.
President Trump says Iran's leadership is seeking negotiations after he warned of possible military action, speaking on Air Force One.
Yesterday, the leaders of Iran called they want to negotiate. I think they're tired of being beat up by the United States.
As massive protests rock the country, President Trump says he is weighing a range of responses to escalating unrest, including possible military options.
There seem to be some people killed that aren't supposed to be killed. These are violent. If you call them leaders, I don't know if they're leaders or just they rule through violence. But we're looking at it very seriously. The military is looking at it. And we're looking at some very strong options.
The Iranian parliament speaker on Sunday warned the U.S. against what he called a miscalculation.
Know that in case of an attack on Iran, the occupied lands, as well as U.S. military bases in the region, will be our legitimate targets.
Trump responded to Iran's threat of retaliation.
If they do that, we will hit them at levels that they've never been hit before. And they won't even believe it.
Trump also said yesterday that he plans to speak with Elon Musk about restoring internet in Iran. Authorities have blacked out services since Thursday.
Well, we're going to be talking about that. We may get the internet going, if that's possible. We may speak to Elon, because as you know, he's very good at that kind of thing. He's got a very good company.
Iran's current protests began on December 28th in response to soaring prices before turning against the Islamic regime that has governed since the 1979 revolution. A human rights group said yesterday the ongoing unrest has killed more than 500 people. The U.S.-based group Human Rights Activists in Iran said it had verified the deaths of 490 protesters and 48 security personnel. It also said more than 10,000 people have been arrested in the 2 weeks of unrest. Meanwhile, Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, the exiled son of Iran's last Shah, has called on Iranians to continue their protests. And in Los Angeles, chaos yesterday during a protest against the Iranian regime. Police say a man drove a U-Haul through a crowd of protesters. A sign on the side of the truck said, "No Shah, no regime, USA don't repeat 1953, a reference to the 1953 coup instigated by the U.S. government and the Shah. 2 people suffered minor injuries. Protesters surrounded the truck and began smashing the vehicle's windows. Police said they detained the driver pending further investigation. They did not publicly identify him. It's unclear whether the event was an intentional attack.
War Secretary Pete Hegseth is traveling to Brownsville, Texas today for a speech alongside Elon Musk. According to a War Department press release, the two will speak to SpaceX leaders and staff. The department also said the secretary would, quote, administer the oath of enlistment to the next generation of American warfighters. Hegseth will also visit Lockheed Martin on his trip. And joining us now to discuss the latest in Iran is Daniel Flesch, senior policy analyst on the Middle East and North Africa with the Heritage Foundation. Good to have you with us this morning, Daniel. Stark warnings for the regime in Iran from the U.S., but also in the latest, Trump is saying that Iran is actually seeking talks with the U.S. What do you anticipate there?
Yes, well, good to be here. The Iranian regime certainly finds itself between a rock and a hard place with the protests gaining in strength, momentum, and scope of the last week or so. And the Ayatollah knows that President Trump makes good on his threats to take military or other action against the regime, as we saw during Operation Midnight Hammer last June. So it's, of course, obvious that the regime, the leaders, will at least feign to want to talk to the president to buy some time, relieve some pressure, forestall a U.S. action, whether that's military or other action against them. It doesn't surprise me. The question really is, what does President Trump want to do? And does he want to, as he said last week or the other week, saying, if there is violence against these protesters, the U.S. will do something. We're at this point now, so it remains to be seen what he chooses to do.
Yes, he does also say that the U.S. is watching closely by the hour. I mean, how soon are you anticipating we could see potentially seismic change in Iran?
Well, the president's supposed to meet with his advisors tomorrow, Tuesday, to deliberate and discuss further and consider a range of options. But there's a lot of stuff they could be doing more immediately before moving military assets to the region, such as starting to seize or at least monitor and track Iranian or other flagged shipments of oil to and from the country, particularly goes from Iran to China. If there could be a military buildup, we would see that taking place. But again, we know the military buildup of last summer took place over a few weeks, so it would take some time. However, immediately the president could ratchet up the diplomatic pressure on Iran. Also, a call could go out to everyone in the United States, political leaders in particular, and Europe, to increase the pressure on the regime itself as well. So steps we could be doing even now that is in advance of any sort of military action.
Okay, and if the regime does fall, what comes next?
Well, that's still an open question. That's a very open question with most revolutions and protests and demonstrations. Most revolutions require at least two things for a new government to come into power. One is a ideological leader, and another is an operational leader. That could also often be the same person. In this case, it may not be. Reza Pahlavi, the son of the former Shah, is an ideological leader. It's actually his call for Iranians to come out in the streets at 8 p.m. local time last Friday that prompted this new resurgence of protests. Of course, he's been out of the country for about 40 or 50 years, living in the United States or elsewhere. And so he has not been back in Iran, although many people refer to him as perhaps the presumptive heir, presumptive leader to take over the country. It remains to be seen as well, if the Ayatollah himself is removed from power, that does not mean the regime itself is gone. You still have the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, essentially the paramilitary that is supposed to back the regime has considerable power, not to mention the guns in the country. So this thing is far from over. But the hope I would suspect is the Iranian people are able to liberate themselves with perhaps Reza Pahlavi as a titular leader to begin with, but certainly transition to something more stable and democratic in the future.
And just considering where we're at right now and this point of the unrest, what factors from here on out are most likely to precipitate the downfall of the regime there?
Well, the first thing I'd say certainly right now is if the U.S. decides to take action. And again, it could take a number of different forms, but if there's a lot of pressure points the regime has. For example, if we start interdicting and seizing Iranian shipments of oil to Russia and China in particular, suddenly the regime has no sort of economic or financial leverage, or it can't even pay the bills effectively. And that is what began this protest, is the falling currency, the plummeting of the Iranian rial. And so that's what prompted this financial straits that they're in. In addition, these protests, if they are sustained, if they get support right now, perhaps from outside actors, particularly because the regime has cut internet power to the countries, only operating at about 1% of bandwidth, as I understand it. So if the Iranian people can get more messages out and receive messages from the outside world, that could help sustain them as well and show the regime that there's more support for the protesters than the regime. And beyond that, I'd say if these protests sustain themselves, you could reach a tipping point when the regime elites start to either flee or turn on the regime itself. And that's when you could see things really tipping to a post-regime environment.
And I know you've served as a senior advisor at Israel's mission to the United Nations. What role, if any, might Israel and or the UN play in the aftermath of these protests, or indeed from this point on?
Yeah, from the Israeli point of view, the Prime Minister Netanyahu and the government's been pretty vocal and obviously supporting the Iranian people, but this is not a fight they can really engage in beyond obviously hoping and praying for an end to the regime and the liberation of the Iranian people. The UN itself has a very limited role and leverage to play here. Again, particularly now in the Trump era, it's really a question of what the president himself wants to do and how much other leaders can do to support the Iranian people. I saw just today that the European Parliament is no longer going to allow Iranian diplomats to enter their committee rooms and their buildings, as I understand it. That's a great signal to show that the regime is losing support in the West. So it's a lot of these smaller measures to show that the regime should be on its way out can help build support from the outside while the Iranian people continue to build pressure from the inside.
Lastly, what will you be watching for next?
Well, I'll certainly be waiting to see what the communications come out from the White House after Trump meets with his advisors tomorrow on Tuesday. Continue to see what the Iranian protesters do, if they can expand the scope of their protests. We'll still, we saw earlier in your segment about 500 people have been confirmed to be killed by the regime. That number will certainly rise. And that number also might already be much higher, but because of the internet blackout, we don't have a clear sense and picture of it. So, these kind of small things. And also the president just noted that he was going to talk to Elon Musk about trying to get more Starlink access to Iran. If that's a possibility, again, opening up internet access can give the outside world a much better indication of what's happening on the ground. So these individual considerations in the next few days will, I think, make a big determination in the direction the protests go.
Yeah, many moving parts in a very short time span. Good to speak with you, Daniel Flesch. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And President Trump says relations with Venezuela's leadership are working out well. He was speaking to reporters aboard Air Force One yesterday, saying he plans to meet with Venezuela's interim president, Delcy Rodriguez, soon.
Venezuela is really working out well. We're working along really well with the leadership, and we'll see how it all works out. Look, she asked us, can we take 50 million barrels of oil? And I said, yes, we can. It's $4.2 billion. And it's on its way right now to the United States.
Trump added that he might block ExxonMobil from investing in Venezuela. This comes after the oil giant CEO called the country uninvestable during a White House meeting last week. CEO Darren Woods told Trump that Venezuela would need to change its laws before it could be an attractive investment opportunity. Trump said yesterday he didn't like Exxon's response, telling reporters he'd probably be inclined to keep them out. The U.S. Embassy in Venezuela says the security situation in the country remains fluid. It warned U.S. citizens this weekend not to travel to Venezuela, reiterating warnings dating back to 2019. It said international flights have resumed and all U.S. citizens should leave the country immediately. The embassy said they should take precautions and be aware of their surroundings, citing reports of armed militias setting up roadblocks and searching vehicles for evidence of U.S. citizenship or support for the United States. And the Supreme Court today declined to hear a challenge to the Boy Scouts of America's landmark $2.46 billion settlement. The case involves a group of sexual abuse survivors. They wanted to pursue lawsuits against churches and other organizations that ran scouting programs where there was abuse. The Boy Scout settlement from 2022 granted immunity from lawsuits to those organizations. The court also rejected Citigroup's bid to avoid a lawsuit. Citigroup is accused of orchestrating fraud at the bankrupt Mexican oil and gas services company Oceanografía. The bank is accused of more than $1 billion of losses. The Supreme Court decision means a lower court's decision to revive the decade-old lawsuit will proceed. More than 30 plaintiffs are involved in the case, including Oceanografía Grafia bondholders. And Paramount is taking its pursuit of Warner Brothers Discovery to court. David Ellison's media company is asking a Delaware court to force WBD to provide information about its deal with Netflix. He's been trying to buy WBD for months, but the company's board of directors inked a deal with Netflix instead. Now Ellison is trying to gain control of WBD in a hostile takeover where Paramount buys a majority of its stock. For that to work, a sufficient number of WBD shareholders would have to agree to sell. Right now, they're split on whether Paramount or Netflix is offering the better deal. Meta has named Dina Powell McCormick as its president and vice chairman. The announcement comes weeks after the former deputy national security advisor to President Donald Trump resigned from the social media company's board. Powell McCormick stepped down from Meta's board in December, just 8 months after joining. Trump congratulated Powell McCormick on her appointment in a Truth Social post. The president praised her as a fantastic and very talented person who served in his administration with strength and distinction. Meta said Powell McCormick will be a key figure in deciding the company's strategic direction and execution. The tech giant added that her responsibilities will include leading efforts to forge new strategic capital partnerships. And the largest nurses' strike in New York City's history began today after talks collapsed. Union officials say nearly 15,000 nurses are walking off the job. The strike will affect some of the city's largest privately run hospitals, including Mount Sinai, Montefiore Einstein, and New York Presbyterian. The union is demanding an increase in wages, increased staffing, full health care coverage, workplace protections against violence, and safeguards on the use of AI in health care. The New York State Nursing Association said yesterday that contract talks with those hospital systems have stalled. Governor Kathy Hochul has declared a state of emergency, warning a strike could threaten patient safety. As lawmakers are working to find a deal on lowering health care costs, President Trump justifies ending COVID-era tax credits to support Obamacare. His comments come after several Republicans broke ranks on the issue. NTD's Melina Wisecup has more.
The COVID-era tax subsidies that help pay for Obamacare expired at the beginning of the month. Senators on Capitol Hill now under pressure to find a path to address health care costs.
I am hopeful next week that the Senate will be able to put out a bill that is a compromise that addresses the extension with reforms, including income limits, insurance reforms, the elimination of zero premium plans.
Because it has to conform first with what President Trump says he wants, which, by the way, I totally agree with. And that is, don't give 100% of the money to the insurance companies who take 20% of it for profit and overhead. Give the money to the patient. And she will use.
President Trump on Sunday sought to justify an end to the enhanced Obamacare subsidies, sharing comments from the D.C. think tank Cato Institute, calling for Congress to stop talking about extending the taxpayer-funded subsidies. Instead, the think tank's health policy director calls to restore health insurance relief from Trump's first term. In the post copied by Trump, the director said, "It won't destabilize Obamacare, much simpler than what President Trump's advisors are selling him, much better to assuage the fears of nervous Democrats." The president's post comes after several House Republicans voted with Democrats to extend Obamacare subsidies for 3 years.
The People's House has just delivered a decisive victory for the American people by extending the Affordable Care Act tax credits to prevent tens of millions of Americans from experiencing dramatically increased health insurance premiums.
Though most Republicans oppose the extension, several of them told NTD it's a waste of tax dollars.
We were able to uncover through an investigation that the same Social Security number was used 125 times, the same one, to apply for these insurance premiums, and it was accepted 125 times. Wow. So we know that there is rampant waste, fraud, and abuse in that system.
Even with those tax credits in place, Obamacare premiums have skyrocketed. So they're not applying the tax credits, to keep prices under control.
In my view, I don't see the logic behind increasing subsidies on a known broken system, and that's what this is.
House Republicans are calling on top health insurance executives to testify later this month. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Wisecup, NTD News.
Former Congresswoman Mary Peltola is challenging Alaska Republican Senator Dan Sullivan in this year's midterm elections. The Democrat is pledging to fight the establishment to make life more affordable for Alaskans. In 2022, Peltola won special and regular elections, defeating a field that included former Republican Governor Sarah Palin. In 2024, she lost to Republican Nick Belgich. Peltola focused on local concerns in her announcement, including supplies of salmon and migratory birds in her state. Sullivan is a former state attorney general and natural resources commissioner. He defeated the state's last Democratic senator in 2014. Alaska has open primaries and ranked choice voting in general elections. The top 4 candidates in the August primary will advance to the November general election. And Michigan Lieutenant Governor Garland Gilchrist II is suspending his campaign for governor. Instead, he'll be joining the race for Michigan's Secretary of State. Gilchrist's decision clears the Democratic primary field for current Secretary Jocelyn Benson. Benson is now set to face only Genesee County Sheriff Chris Swanson in the Democratic primary in August. Congressman John James, former Michigan Attorney General Mike Cox, State Senate Leader Eric Nesbitt, and former Michigan House Speaker Tom Leonard are competing for the Republican nomination. The Michigan Democratic Party convention is scheduled for April 19th. Michigan voters will also be selecting a new state attorney general and a U.S. senator in November. Current Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer can't run due to term limits. And coming up, Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum says she had a good conversation with President Trump. The issues the two world leaders discussed, plus Pope Leo meeting with Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado. Their meeting comes after U.S. forces captured Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro. I'm Stephanie Cox, and this is World Watch. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum says she had a good conversation with President Trump. The two talked about security, efforts to reduce drug trafficking, as well as trade and investment. In her daily press conference, Sheinbaum said she ruled out U.S. military intervention in Mexico. Trump last week on Fox News said cartels were running Mexico and suggested the U.S. could strike land targets to combat them. This comes just one day after Secretary of State Marco Rubio spoke with his Mexican counterpart. The two discussed the need for stronger cooperation to tackle Mexico's narco-terrorist networks and stop the trafficking of fentanyl and weapons. Meanwhile, a Swiss court has ordered the co-owner of a ski resort bar to remain in custody. The establishment caught fire on New Year's Day, killing 40 people. Prosecutors initially ordered the co-owner to be detained on Friday after hearing with him and his wife. The court said that he will be held for a provisional period of 3 months. The court added that it could review its decision if measures are taken to counter flight risk. His wife's lawyers said in a statement that the court's decision will allow her husband to be released on bail once the conditions have been met. And Pope Leo met Venezuelan opposition leader and Nobel Peace Prize winner Maria Corina Machado today. Leo has called for Venezuela to remain an independent country after U.S. forces captured Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro. The first American pope has also denounced the use of military force as a means of achieving diplomatic goals. He also called for human rights to be protected in Venezuela. Machado was barred from running in Venezuela's 2024 general election. A former National Assembly member, she backed a stand-in candidate who was widely considered to have won the vote. Maduro declared victory, but ballot audits by independent observers showed he lost the election. Over in Indonesia and Malaysia, the two countries have become the first to block Elon Musk's AI tool Grok. It's been under scrutiny for allowing users to create sexually explicit images from real photos. In some cases, Grok has reportedly been used to digitally undress pictures of minors. Officials in both Indonesia and Malaysia have said these images are the reason that they have banned the tool. Grok is different from other AI chatbots because it's integrated into X, which of course is formerly known as Twitter. Musk has been resistant to limit Grok, saying doing so is a form of censorship. Critical minerals take center stage at a G7 finance ministers meeting in Washington today. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says Australia and India have been invited to the sit-down. The meeting builds on discussions that began at last summer's G7 summit and continued with a virtual session in December. The G7 nations consist of the United States, Britain, Japan, France, Germany, Italy, and Canada. They have been seeking to reduce reliance on China, which dominates much of the global critical minerals supply chain. Hong Kong's High Court heard mitigation arguments today for pro-democracy media tycoon Jimmy Lai. That's a phase of the trial where defense lawyers ask judges to reduce a potential sentence. The hearing is the final step before a sentencing that could see him jailed for life. Last month, a 78-year-old was convicted of publishing seditious material under Beijing's draconian national security law. Lai has denied all charges. The verdict has drawn condemnation from around the world, including from the United States, the European Union, and Britain. Defense lawyers cited Lai's age, his health condition, and years in solitary confinement in seeking leniency. A landmark genocide case opened today at the UN's top court. Gambia is accusing Myanmar, also known as Burma, of targeting Rohingya Muslims for destruction. Here are the details.
Please be seated.
A landmark case accusing Myanmar of committing genocide against the Rohingya opened at the United Nations top court on Monday. This is the first genocide case the International Court of Justice will hear in full in over a decade. Speaking in The Hague before the hearings, Rohingya victims said they want the long-awaited court case to deliver justice.
I would like to mention that this time we don't just hope to get justice, we demand it. And we would like to ask the court to take the actions against the Myanmar dictators, the leaders of the Myanmar military who committed the genocide. They have to be accountable, and they should be punished. So this time, we want to see a real output from the court and actions.
The predominantly Muslim country of Gambia filed a case at the ICJ in 2019. They accused Myanmar of committing genocide against the Rohingya, a mainly Muslim minority in the Rakhine state. Myanmar has denied the genocide accusations.
And I think it's a little unreasonable to expect us to resolve everything in 18 months.
In 2017, Myanmar's military launched an offensive that forced at least 730,000 Rohingya to flee to Bangladesh. There, they recounted stories of killings, mass rape and arson. A UN fact-finding mission said that the offensive had included acts that were, quote, genocidal. Myanmar rejected that report, saying its military offensive was in response to attacks by Muslim militants.
Coming up in the NFL playoffs, the defending champions are out after an exciting first round of action. NTD's Dave Martin joins us to discuss. And size isn't everything. A deer and a rhino clash in a Polish zoo. The ending? Unbelievable. You'll want to stick around for that. Now from your sports news, we're joined by NTD's very own Dave Martin. Dave, we have some baseball news, but let's start with the NFL. The playoffs just got underway. What so far has happened? Headlines.
A lot has actually happened so far, Steph. I mean, for one thing, the defending Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles
they're out. They lost to San Francisco yesterday in a close one, 23-19. Now, I have to say, though, Philadelphia did not look as dominant this year as they were last year, so it wasn't a huge surprise to me. Now, meanwhile, there was a costly win for the Niners. They lost tight end George Kittles to an Achilles tear. It's a very tough loss for them. Yeah. Now, elsewhere, Buffalo Bills got their first playoff road win in more than 3 decades when they beat Jacksonville yesterday in another close one, 27-24. Really close back and forth games were the theme of the weekend. You know, of the 5 games we've had so far, the team that led with 2 minutes left in the game ended up losing 3 of those 5 games. Now, the first 2 were Saturday. Rams over the Panthers. That was a back and forth final fourth quarter. Rams got the last say in that one. Then the Bears came back. They were down 21-3 to the Packers. Ended up getting the final go-ahead score in the final 2 minutes there. Buffalo did it to Jacksonville, another back and forth final quarter. It really, the Eagles nearly actually did it to the 49ers. They were down 23-19. They were driving there with a couple minutes left, but 49ers defense stopped them. The only game that was decided by more than 1 score was the Patriots beating the Chargers 16-3. But even that was a pretty close game.
Edge of the seat set of games there.
Edge of the seat games there. I love those back and forth games there, and we had a number of them.
Keeps you watching. Okay, so I also want to turn now to another playoff game tonight, Pittsburgh versus Houston. What's your take? Who are you rooting for?
You know, well, who I'm rooting for and who I'm picking are 2 different things. I think Houston is going to win, but I'm partial to Pittsburgh. I like Aaron Rodgers. But Houston has that great pass rush defense, really. Especially their pass rush. They have a great defense, really the number 1 in the NFL. Aaron Rodgers, at 42 years old, is still proving to be a very good quarterback. He doesn't scramble as well as he used to. That's going to be very tough for them, I think, with that pass rush. Now, the Steelers do get their top receiver back. That's DK Metcalf. Now, he missed the final 2 games of the regular season, serving that suspension. So he's their top receiver. So there's that for Pittsburgh anyway. But the winner of this game is then going to face the Patriots next week in the second round. Now, the other 3 games, we've got them right now. Buffalo at Denver, as well as San Francisco at Seattle. That'll be on Saturday. Then on Sunday, LA Rams at Chicago. Meanwhile, the Patriots will face the winner of tonight's Houston versus Pittsburgh game. So
there you go.
Don't miss it, all right?
No, very much. Okay, I'll be coming to you for the Cliff Notes. Shifting gears to baseball, the Chicago Cubs have reportedly agreed to a 5-year deal with free agent all-star third baseman Alex Bregman. That's worth $175 million. What do you make of that?
You know, Cubs got a good one. He's an all-star player for a reason, like you mentioned. And this news came out Saturday. It was the same day the Chicago Bears had that great comeback win over the Packers I was just talking about. So it was a good day for Chicago sports fans. Meanwhile, a tough day for Boston Red Sox fans. Now, they signed Bregman last year to I think it was a 3-year deal, but he could opt out after the first season, and he did. Now, he plays third base. When Boston signed him, they already had a very good third baseman there in Rafael Devers. Meanwhile, they ended up trading Devers during the season, and now they don't have either third baseman. So, and even looking at the free agents right now, other than Bo Bichette, who's more of a middle infielder, I don't know where they find a third baseman who can kind of replace what Bregman does. So, good day for the Chicago Cubs and Chicago sports fans. Not a great day for the Boston Red Sox fans. So, so good and the bad here.
And what does that say about with Bregman opting out?
Well, he had a good season, so he knew when he would go back into free agency that he could get a bigger deal than he had gotten last
strategic.
year.
No shade on his former team.
No, I don't think it was any shade. It was probably like, probably the agent told him, you can get a big deal if you opt out this year.
Yeah.
He's only 31. He's a very good player, so it's strategy.
Good for Bregman. We'll be watching him closely. Thank you, Dave.
You're welcome.
And next up, a ski resort in the French Alps is turning to rescue drones powered by artificial intelligence. In addition to a winter sports destination, the mountain has become a base camp for the future. NTD's Andrew Thomas has the details.
More than 7,500 feet above sea level is Val Thorens, the highest elevation of any European ski resort. Its peak, more than 10,000 feet. But the breathtaking views and epic ski runs come with risks. Ski Patrol tech manager Olivier Gardet says they're adopting drones to assist in their operations.
It is equipped with a thermal camera, a zoom camera that magnifies 200 times, and a wide spectrum camera. It fully meets all of our operational needs. Oh, I almost forgot, it also has a laser pointer that provides GPS coordinates from up to 1.1 kilometers away.
High above the slopes, the drone can spot details the human eye can't.
So, we also have the possibility to use a headset. But as a pilot, I have to look at the screen to be able to follow the drone, and another person can put the headset like that to be able to see the security mission and tell me if there are people that I would not have spotted.
Starting in January 2026, a new drone will join the ski patrol fleet. It can be launched into the air remotely from the patrol office. Inside, Ski Patrol monitors screens with real-time data from across the entire ski area. A live feed shows how thousands of skiers are moving across the mountain at any given time. New technologies will be game-changing for mountains like Val Thorens, which welcomed over 1 million skiers during the 2023-2024 winter season. Andrew Thomas, NTD News.
And a battle of epic proportions took place at a Polish zoo this month when a tiny deer took on a colossal Indian rhino and seemingly won. The 37-pound deer seemed undaunted, staring down the 1.8-ton Indian rhino. In a viral social media post, the zoo captioned the video, "Someone probably forgot to look in the mirror this morning." But the zoo says the massive rhino is very gentle and aware of her size. According to zookeepers, the rhino treated the encounter as fun and games. But for the deer, it was a fierce defense of his mate, who is in heat. The animals share an enclosure in the zoo's Asia Pavilion, mimicking their natural habitat. Slice of life there. All right, if you have any feedback on our show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at news.today@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. We'll cover more news right after this break.